Biblical scholars have argued for years about the location of these holy sites. Now, one man says he might have found them.
For thousands of years, something lay buried beneath Mount Sinai, sealed in absolute darkness and undisturbed by time or human touch.
This is the Holy Lands. Beneath my feet, just rocky desert. This is incredible.
When archaeologists finally breached the hidden chamber, they expected ruins, but instead uncovered objects that defied reality, forged from materials unknown to science and crafted with impossible precision.
We're in Saudi Arabia, climbing the real Mount Sinai.
And at the center of the chamber sat something that no scientist, no religious text, and no civilization in recorded history had ever prepared anyone to find. The shocking descent. The screen started flickering hard the moment the drone slipped through the narrow opening and crossed into that darkness. And this wasn't normal darkness. This was the kind no one had touched for thousands of years. For a few long seconds, the feed completely broke into static, and this deep mechanical hum filled the control tent. Not normal. It sounded like the signal itself was struggling to stay alive after crossing that line. Then suddenly, it came back. And what they saw next, no one was ready for it. The corridor appeared, fully. The walls rose on both sides, perfectly straight. Massive sandstone blocks locked together so tightly they didn't even look like blocks anymore. They looked fused, no cracks, no damage, nothing. And that's what made it worse. Because how is that even possible? The mountain above had been beaten by heat, wind, time, for thousands of years. But this place, it looked untouched, like time had never been allowed inside. No one in the tent said a word. They just stared. As the drone moved forward, the readings started coming in, and this is where things got unsettling fast. The air inside wasn't moving at all. No airflow, nothing. Humidity, 0, not changing. Temperature, completely fixed. Not even a slight shift. That's not normal. That's not how sealed spaces behave. So, what is this place? Then the light hit the wall and the carvings showed up. Long panels, one after another, like a story. The first one showed beams coming down from above, straight down. And the way it was carved, it forced your eyes downward too, like something was coming in fast, hitting, or forcing its way through. The second one, this is where people started getting uncomfortable. It showed human figures, bent low, heads pushed down, and it didn't look like they chose that position. No, it looked forced, like something above them was pressing them down, holding them there. Then the third panel showed up, and this is where everything changed. Rectangular shapes were coming down from above, and the human figures were reaching up toward them. They looked like tablets. But this didn't feel like a gift, not even close. It felt forced, like something was being given whether they wanted it or not. At this point, you could feel the tension in the tent. No one was saying it out loud, but everyone was thinking the same thing. What are we actually looking at here? Then the drone light hit the containers along the walls. One flashed back gold, bright, sharp. Another one held crystals. But the way they reacted to the light, that's what got people. It didn't look like normal reflection. It looked responsive. The drone's arm then brushed the floor, and dust lifted slowly into the air, way too slowly, like it had been sitting there forever, undisturbed. And under that dust, there were gold pieces, scattered everywhere, not placed neatly like the containers. No, this looked messy, broken, like something had happened here, something violent. And then things got worse outside. Back at the camp, the weather suddenly turned. Sandstorms hit without warning, hard, violent, the kind that slams into everything. Equipment started taking damage. The wind was loud, relentless. You could barely see. Then the heat kicked in, pushing systems past what they could handle. Power started dropping. Communication started failing. And here's the part that really bothered them. The closer they worked to the entrance, the worse it got. That's not normal. That's not random. So, what is causing it? Then ground sensors picked something up. At first it seemed small, easy to ignore, but then they noticed the pattern. It wasn't random, it was repeating, over and over and over. And the worst part, It wasn't just data anymore. People said they could feel it, a pressure, moving through the ground into the tent and into them. Inside the corridor, the drone reached the end and slowed down, then stopped. There was another barrier, bigger, heavier, more imposing than the first. And at that moment, the question changed. It wasn't, what is under this mountain anymore? No, now it was, who already knew? Because this thing had been hidden for a very long time, long before this excavation ever started. And the people who knew weren't scientists. They were monks. They had lived at the base of this mountain for 14 centuries. Why? The mountain and its keepers. Mount Sinai rises out of the desert in a way that makes everything around it feel smaller and more exposed. The land around it is harsh and empty, made of dry valleys and broken rocks stretching in every direction. The heat during the day feels like it presses down on the skin, and at night, the cold feels sharp enough to cut through bone. Nothing about this place feels gentle. It feels like a place that was never meant to hold life for long. For thousands of years, people have treated this mountain as something more than just stone. In the story of Judaism, this is where divine law was given to Moses, where he climbed alone into smoke and thunder and returned with stone tablets said to carry the words of God. In Christianity, this same mountain became a place where God revealed power and judgment in a way humans could not ignore. In Islam, it is remembered as the place where Musa, known as Moses, spoke directly with Allah. Three major faiths built on different histories all point to the same mountain in the desert and treat it as a moment where heaven communicated with earth. That kind of shared belief has made Mount Sinai feel untouchable, as if it belongs to something beyond human ownership. But beneath that shared belief, a different question began to grow in modern times. Some researchers started to notice that the traditional identification of Mount Sinai might not match the older descriptions found in ancient texts. A growing number of biblical archaeology scholars began pointing toward another location, a mountain called Jabal al-Lawz in Saudi Arabia. They claimed this mountain showed signs that could not be easily explained. The top appeared darkened in a way that looks like it once burned. There were reports of carvings in the area that looked like a golden calf scene, which matched the Exodus story. Then there were claims of a large split rock formation that could have released water in massive quantities. There were even suggestions of stone arrangements that looked like ancient altars. But when some of these researchers tried to study the area more closely, they were stopped by authorities. Reports spread that they were detained, warned, and ordered to leave. They were told not to publish or speak about what they believed they had seen. The mountain was placed under strict control, and public access became impossible. The full findings were never released in a clear way to the public. That silence created more questions than answers. If the traditional mountain was not the real location, then what exactly had been protected for so long in the desert stories of both regions? Far from those debates, in the Sinai Peninsula, another ancient presence stood at the base of the traditional mountain. St. Catherine's Monastery had been there for more than 1,000 years without interruption. Thick stone walls protected it from the desert outside. Inside, monks lived quiet lives of prayer and study, keeping watch over one of the oldest surviving Christian communities in the world. The monastery also held something far less visible, but far more powerful. It contained one of the largest collections of ancient manuscripts on Earth, second only to the Vatican. These texts were written in many languages and covered many centuries. Some of them had never been fully studied by outside scholars. In the middle of the modern era, workers repairing parts of the monastery made a discovery that changed everything. While fixing a section of a tower, they broke through what looked like a sealed floor. Behind it was a hidden room that did not appear on any record or map of the building. It had been closed off for so long that no one alive seemed to know it existed. Inside, they found stacks of old parchment manuscripts that had remained untouched for centuries. Among them were pages that matched the Codex Sinaiticus, one of the oldest known copies of the Christian Bible. These pages had been believed lost forever. Yet, here they were, sitting in silence behind a wall that had been sealed by unknown hands. The discovery raised a deeper question that no one could answer clearly. Who had closed that room, and why had it been erased from memory? That question became even heavier when scholars learned about the monastery's collection of palimpsests. These were manuscripts where older writing had been scraped off and replaced with new text. In ancient times, parchment was expensive, so scribes often destroyed older writings to reuse the material. But modern imaging technology revealed what had been hidden underneath. Some of the erased texts included early medical writings, unknown mythological poems, and even fragments of languages that were thought to be completely lost. The act of erasing them had not been random. It looked deliberate, as if someone had chosen what the future was allowed to remember and what it must forget. When scholars asked the monks about tunnels or hidden spaces beneath the monastery, the answers were always cold or incomplete. Most of the time, the monks would simply walk away without speaking. On one occasion, an old monk finally responded before turning to leave. He said that the mountain keeps what the mountain swallows. No one ever received a clearer explanation than that. The words stayed in the minds of those who heard them, because they sounded less like a metaphor and more like a warning. Soon after, questions about underground passages stopped being answered at all. Outside the monastery walls, traces of something older were also being noticed. Faint markings in stone suggested that structures once extended toward the mountain itself. Some of these markings had been damaged or removed, as if someone had taken tools and deliberately erased them. The idea that parts of the past had been physically scraped away made the entire site feel less like a preserved history and more like a controlled memory. Yet even this monastery was not the beginning of the story. Long before the first stone of St. Catherine's was ever laid, the desert surrounding this mountain was already carrying something. The Bedouin tribes who had wandered this land for generations heard and saw things around the mountain that even the monastery's scholars could not explain. What the desert remembers. Mount Sinai has always felt less like a place resting in the desert and more like something that watches over it. The stories that came from it did not behave like normal folklore. They did not fade or change easily with time. Instead, they stayed fixed in place and repeated in different languages, across different centuries, from people who had never met and had no reason to agree with each other. Each story sounded small on its own, but together they began to build a pressure that was hard to ignore. It starts with the name itself, a name that most people repeat without thinking. Sinai. Italian archaeologist Emanuele Annati spent more than 30 years studying a place called Har Karkom in the southern Negev desert. What he found there changed the way some researchers look at the origins of this region. He documented tens of thousands of rock carvings, hundreds of archaeological sites, and many ancient gathering places that looked like they were used for ritual worship. The time period of this activity was extremely old, far older than the established timeline of later biblical traditions. From this evidence, Annati concluded that the region had once been a major center of worship, dedicated to a deity known as Sin. Sin was the moon god in ancient Mesopotamian belief systems. The name Sinai, according to this line of research, appears to come directly from that ancient deity. That idea carries a quiet shock when you sit with it. It suggests that the mountain's identity did not begin with Moses or with later religious traditions. It may have been connected to belief systems that existed long before those stories were ever written. If that is true, then the mountain was already sacred, named, and feared long before any known scripture ever described it. From there, the stories shift away from history and into something far more unsettling. Among Bedouin tribes who lived near the mountain for generations, there is a repeated account that appears in slightly different forms but never fully disappears. At night, soft blue lights were seen near the slopes of the mountain. They did not behave like fireflies or natural reflections. They appeared in one place, hovered briefly, and then vanished without leaving any trace. What made these accounts more disturbing was not just the lights themselves, but the way they moved. They never followed predictable paths. They shifted position in ways that made witnesses feel uncomfortable, as if the movement was not random, but intentional. Some people said it felt like something was looking back at them through the light. Others refused to describe it at all, and simply stopped telling the story after a certain point in their lives. Across generations, the same detail kept returning. The lights were not passive, they seemed aware. As time passed, the stories changed slightly in tone, but not in structure. Around the 12th century, oral accounts from the same region began describing a sound rising from beneath the ground near the mountain. It was not thunder, it was not wind. It was steady and controlled, almost like a pulse. It repeated at intervals that felt too precise to be natural. One man reportedly followed the sound until he reached a point where it was strongest. Then he began to dig, driven by fear or curiosity that no one fully understood. His tools struck something solid beneath the sand. The impact was so sharp that the metal broke on contact. The surface below was smooth, too smooth for natural rock. The man stopped immediately, covered the area, and never returned to it again. The place was later given a name that translated loosely as the Passage of Light. People avoided it. Some who went near it later returned in a broken state, unable to explain what they had experienced, with their eyes fixed on something that no one else could see. Then the story moves from oral tradition into something physical and documented. In the year 1693, an Italian explorer traveling through ancient pilgrimage routes was given a fragment of copper by desert nomads. At first, it looked like a simple piece of engraved metal, but when examined closely, it showed something unusual. It was not just a map of terrain. Beneath the surface representation of the mountain, there was a second structure, a spiral that descended inward in perfect geometric order. This spiral did not resemble natural formation. It did not resemble symbolic art either. It looked like a design, a planned structure that went down into the earth in controlled steps. When scholars in Rome examined the fragment, they concluded that it represented a real underground formation. The explorer's notes described it clearly, but the copper plate itself later vanished from official archives without explanation. The disappearance was never resolved. Only the written account remained, preserved in historical records that described something beneath the mountain that had been mapped deliberately long before modern science existed. Centuries later, in the year 1927, another event added a different layer of evidence. A violent storm struck the northern side of the mountain. Lightning hit exposed rock and split it open. When local people reached the site, they saw markings that had been hidden inside the rock face. The carvings showed two serpents wrapped around a circular shape. The image was found in many ancient cultures, often used to represent boundaries between worlds or transitions between life and death. But the discovery did not last long. Before researchers could properly document it, another storm moved through the area. This second storm buried the exposed section again, under rock and sand. Only a few photographs remained, and even those were unclear. The mountain had revealed something, and then covered it again almost immediately, as if the exposure itself was not meant to last. Later, scientific attempts to study the region introduced another problem that could not be easily explained. Instruments were said to have mysteriously failed in specific zones around the mountain. Compasses spun without settling. Electronic devices lost function without any visible cause. Signals disappeared in places where they should have been strong. One researcher recorded deep vibrations coming from below the surface. The rhythm was steady and repeated in a way that resembled a heartbeat or a mechanical cycle. When local people were told about these readings, they were not surprised. They simply said that the mountain was alive and that machines could not understand it. They did not say it as a metaphor, they said it as fact. A different layer of evidence came from a recovered Coptic manuscript found in a collection of ancient documents in the mid-20th century. The text described a sealed chamber beneath what it called the Throne of the Covenant. For years, scholars argued about whether the language was symbolic or literal. Then the descriptions in the text were compared with modern geographical mapping. The alignment was exact. The manuscript appeared to describe a real location beneath Mount Sinai. One passage described a future moment when the sands would part and the voice of the stones would return. Many researchers who read it later said the line felt unsettling because it did not read like poetry. It read like a prediction, as if the author believed that what was sealed would eventually become unsealed again. In the early 21st century, satellite imaging added the final layer that brought all earlier accounts into one line. Researchers observed brief flashes of light near the southern base of the mountain. These reflections appeared and disappeared within seconds. They moved too quickly and changed position too sharply to be explained by simple sunlight on minerals. When the coordinates of these reflections were compared with the locations described in Bedouin accounts of the blue lights, they matched almost exactly. Technology was now observing the same positions that oral tradition had described for centuries. Oral stories, ancient maps, Physical carvings, instrument failures, and satellite data were all pointing to the same region. The only difference now was that the world could no longer pretend these were separate coincidences. The next step was no longer about stories or sightings. It was about what lay beneath the ground itself. And when modern scanning technology finally began to map the hidden layers under the mountain, what it revealed would not just confirm old fears. It would destroy every safe assumption about how long something had been waiting below the surface. The technology that saw through the mountain. The shift did not begin with drama or noise. It began with a machine that did its job too well. Scientists had brought in satellite synthetic aperture radar, a system designed to read the ground the way an X-ray reads bone. It sends electromagnetic waves into dry soil and stone and builds images from what returns. It has been used to map buried cities under desert sand and reveal structures hidden from surface view. When the system was aimed at Mount Sinai, the expectation was simple: irregular rock, natural voids, and formations shaped by time and pressure. That is what mountains are supposed to look like beneath the surface. But what came back did not match that expectation. Deep inside the mountain, the radar revealed clean geometry. There were sharp lines, straight edges, and a large rectangular space far below the surface. The dimensions were too precise to be random. The walls ran parallel in a way natural stone does not maintain. The floor appeared level rather than uneven or fractured. One engineer reportedly went silent while studying the screen before saying that it was not a cave and not geology, but a room. That conclusion changed the tone of the project. To confirm the findings, the team used ground-penetrating radar to build a three-dimensional model of the subsurface. The results strengthened the earlier data. The void extended farther and deeper than first measured. It held its shape with consistency that suggested design rather than natural formation. Rock normally collapses or shifts over time, yet this space oddly remains intact. The scientists remained careful in their wording, but their reports still confirmed the same conclusion. There was a constructed chamber beneath Mount Sinai. While the scans continued, archaeologists working at the base of the mountain began finding artifacts. Pottery fragments appeared first, followed by copper tools and carved stone objects that may have served ritual or symbolic purposes. At first, the finds seemed ordinary, but the layers did not match a single period. Some objects were separated by vast spans of time. One group of artifacts was already ancient when the next appeared. That pattern repeated multiple times. Different cultures and different centuries had returned to the same mountain again and again. Carbon dating added further complications. Some samples were older than the earliest known settlements in the region. They predated accepted timelines for organized human activity there. The results challenged established history. There was no known civilization, migration pattern, or recorded culture that matched the presence of these objects. Yet the evidence was physically verified in laboratories. One researcher asked where the rest of the civilization was, if people had been present that early. No answer followed. At that point, progress slowed. Not because the evidence weakened, but because external pressure increased. Local authorities raised concerns about excavation near a sacred site. Religious organizations demanded limits on interpretation. Governments introduced delays and reviews that restricted access. If a constructed chamber existed beneath Mount Sinai, and if it predated known civilization, the implications would extend beyond archaeology into sacred history. As a result, the work became restricted and tightly controlled. Later, photographs circulated among senior researchers showing a buried stone structure. It appeared as a large symmetrical doorway with clean edges and precise alignment. Experts noted that natural processes do not create such entrances. They only erode and eventually destroy them over time. The structure appeared sealed rather than collapsed. Everything up to this point, the legends, the manuscripts, the erased carvings, the satellites, the radar, the leaked photographs, all of it had been pointing toward a single moment. The moment the door came open. The moment a camera crossed the threshold and transmitted back what had been locked inside that corridor since before recorded history began. That moment had arrived, and what the camera showed on the other side of that sealed door was something no living person had ever seen. Inside the vault. For weeks before anyone touched the sealed doorway, the mountain was treated less like a site and more like a system that could fail if disturbed incorrectly. Every reading was taken slowly, repeated, and then verified by a second team that refused to accept any result until it matched exactly. Ground sensors were placed in tight grids around the entrance. Seismic monitors tracked movement beneath the stone. Thermal devices recorded heat that should not have existed at that depth. Even the smallest vibration was stored and compared across stations. Because of this caution, no one wanted to be responsible for a wrong decision at the wrong angle. A minor drill misalignment could shift pressure across the stone face and trigger a collapse that would entirely erase the structure. That risk shaped every discussion and made even experienced engineers double-check numbers they would normally trust. By the time the drilling team prepared to open the entry point, the atmosphere had changed. It no longer felt like exploration. It felt like exposure. When the drone crossed the threshold into the darkness beyond the sealed door, the live feed flickered once, then stabilized, and the corridor appeared. It was not what anyone had prepared themselves for. The walls were made of sandstone blocks cut with precision that should not exist in any known ancient period. Each block was identical in size and aligned perfectly with the next. The joints formed a continuous surface that suggested a single carved structure rather than assembly. The ceiling ran forward in a straight line without deviation. Natural underground spaces always distort under pressure, yet here there was none. The floor matched this precision and remained smooth and level. One structural engineer said this was not excavation, but construction. As the drone moved deeper, carvings appeared on the walls. The first images showed lines of light descending from a single point above the frame. The light was structured and directed rather than natural. The next panel showed human figures kneeling with lowered heads and extended arms, in a gesture of offering or surrender. Their expressions were still and focused. The third panel showed rectangular forms being lowered from above, while human figures below reached upward. There was exchange without violence or chaos. One researcher stopped speaking mid-sentence after recognizing the pattern. Similar carvings had been recorded across archaeological sites in Egypt, Jordan, and surrounding regions. They appeared in places linked to ancient gathering points or unusual magnetic readings. The corridor now appeared to be part of a repeating visual language across civilizations. As the drone continued forward, objects appeared along both sides of the corridor. Stone containers were placed at regular intervals and aligned with the walls. Some contained thin layers of gold. Others held crystalline material that reflected the light in an unnatural glimmers. The room at the surface fell silent except for typing, as no one wanted to interrupt the feed. Then environmental data arrived. The atmospheric readings showed stable conditions inside the corridor. Its temperature, humidity, and particulate levels remained consistent in a way that should not exist in a sealed environment. One scientist studied the data, then silently showed it to a colleague who did not respond. The corridor appeared atmospherically preserved as well as physically intact. As the drone moved further, instruments began failing in sequence. Auxiliary sensors dropped offline first. Navigation systems froze and rebooted. Electromagnetic readings became unstable and followed a pattern that increased with depth. Then the sound sensors detected a rhythm. It matched earlier surface readings beneath the mountain, but was now stronger and clearer. It came through the structure itself, rather than from a distant source. The engineer recalibrated the audio input and confirmed the pulse remained unchanged. The team leader called for a temporary halt, so all readings could be verified before proceeding. When the drone resumed, it had reached the end of the corridor. At first it appeared to be another stone wall. Then the camera adjusted and revealed a second sealed chamber. The door was larger and more complex than the first. The carvings were deeper and suggested a different function or meaning. Electromagnetic readings spiked immediately. The system confirmed space beyond the door that was large and structured. At its center was a density pattern that did not match known geological or structural formations. One scientist described it as a focused center point, as if something had been deliberately placed and contained. The team leader studied the data and instructed the drone to proceed. As it moved closer, every system registered the same anomaly. The pulse did not fade. It strengthened and it was coming from inside the chamber ahead. Behind that second door was the answer to everything. The answer to why the Geological Survey team sealed their report and walked away. The answer to why the monks refused to speak and scraped the carvings from their courtyard walls. The answer to why governments mobilized quietly and why Saudi Arabia placed an entire mountain under armed protection. Behind that second door was something that no framework in science, religion, or history had fully prepared any living person to encounter. What they found is unreal. The moment the drone crossed the threshold into the inner chamber, every system feeding back to the surface became unstable, and the engineers stopped speaking altogether. The signal did not cut out, but instead changed in a way that no one could immediately explain. Light that should have behaved as simple illumination began returning in altered form, as though the chamber itself was deciding how it should be seen. The walls did not reflect anything normally. They absorbed it briefly, then sent it back warmer, heavier, and almost alive. The control room attempted corrections by adjusting exposure, filters, and calibration, yet nothing responded. The chamber resisted reduction into clean data. A faint golden glow filled the space, but there was no visible source. No flame or electricity was present, and no opening allowed sunlight. It appeared as if the stone had held light for so long that it had become trapped and was now leaking out slowly. At the center of this space stood a disturbing structure. It was massive and carved from stone that appeared too precise to be natural. Its rectangular form suggested containment rather than display, while thin layers of gold leaf covered its surface with control that looked more like declaration than decoration. Whoever built it clearly possessed not only skill, but also time and patience that felt difficult to measure. The carvings across its surface intensified the unease. Entire panels showed sequences of events arranged in order, rather than isolated images. Figures moved through what looked like a controlled timeline. Other panels displayed star patterns that did not match any known sky. When one astrophysicist zoomed in, he fell silent and refused to interpret what he saw. Around the structure, objects were arranged in a deliberate ring. Nothing appeared scattered. This order shifted the atmosphere in the control room, since disorder would have suggested decay, while order suggested intent that had survived time. Among these objects lay broken stone tablets. When the robotic arm lifted the first fragment, a young researcher leaned forward too closely to the screen. He had been excited at the start of the mission, yet his reaction changed immediately when he saw the writing. The tablet surface was cracked but stable, as though time had failed to erase it. The script did not match any known system. It was not Hebrew or Aramaic, nor any recognized proto-writing. The symbols were structured yet unfamiliar, resembling a language that had developed outside known human history. His breathing became uneven as he said quietly that the symbols felt as though they were pressing into his thoughts. No one dismissed him. The silence in the control room only deepened. Then the scrolls appeared. They were sealed within wall compartments hidden behind stone slabs that required remote removal. As one compartment opened, the chamber atmosphere in the feed shifted, not through measurable change, but through simultaneous sensor adjustment across all systems. Inside were tightly rolled materials, preserved in ways that did not match known ancient techniques. When the retrieval arm touched the first scroll, the technician paused because it resisted slightly, as though it did not want to open. He began unrolling it anyway. The writing appeared in precise lines that caused linguists to lean forward at once. It resembled proto-Sinaitic structure, but carried complexity that should not have existed at that stage of human development. The technician froze halfway through and continued only after visible hesitation. Then, laboratory results began arriving. Stone samples came from hundreds of miles away, and gold leaf contained elements absent from any known alloy system. Comparisons to known anomalies in ancient metallurgy offered no satisfying explanation. Carbon dating results followed, and the room fell silent as materials returned ages spanning over 10,000 years. However, the deeper contradiction came from inconsistency. Items from the same sealed chamber showed vastly different ages, as though the site had been used repeatedly across time without external disturbance. Arguments followed immediately, yet no explanation accounted for the repeating pattern. Then external attention intensified. Religious representatives arrived separately, each interpreting the discovery through different traditions. While they disagreed on meaning, they all recognized that the scale exceeded any single framework. The chamber challenged all interpretations at once. Attention shifted again toward the tablets and carvings, especially those depicting descent and structured exchange, Yet no consensus formed. At the far wall, however, a deeper inscription drew focus. The text described a sealed structure built to hold truth until a moment of awakening. Similar phrasing appeared in disconnected ancient sources across different regions, including fragments from distant manuscripts that had never been linked before. Beneath the inscription, the floor rose into a circular platform. On it rested a sphere. It was crystal clear, perfectly formed, and larger than a human head. It emitted shifting internal light without rhythm or source, and no heat or energy registered. Its properties defied classification, as though it existed outside normal physical expectation. The chamber fell into complete observational silence as all evidence converged toward a single realization. Everything present had not been discovered in isolation. It had been waiting together, sealed within one structure, until the moment it could no longer remain hidden. And that moment had already begun.